are getting some new news as well from the president. He's just putting out on Truth Social, we have complete and total control of the skies over Iran. Iran had good sky trackers and other defensive equipment, and plenty of it, but it does not compare to American-made, conceived, and manufactured stuff. Nobody does it better than the good old USA. But the news there is the skies that they have control over Iran, and sort of what do you make of all of this?
I make that the president is absolutely signaling to Iran this is still a very fluid and unpredictable situation. And that's the position that he wants Iran to know the U.S. is taking, because Iran wants stability right now above all else. And they're not going to get that because Israel is not pulling back. They're going to go as far as they possibly can because they want to completely dismantle Iran's ability to enrich uranium. They know that Iran poses a massive threat. They have always said their reason for being with this authoritarian theocracy is the destruction of Israel. Iran has said that if Israel ever hits them, they will hit back with a blinding force that Israel never could have conceived of. And now we're seeing that bluster is not necessarily being backed up. I think once General Soleimani was taken out during the first Trump administration, the military, the Revolutionary Guard, has never fully recovered. They have not recovered politically. And while you have all of that going on, what we haven't really been talking about are the Iranian citizens. They want peace, they want prosperity, and they want stability. A lot of them remember a time in Iran when the Shah was in power, and they very much want to go back to that. There are a lot of people who live in the United States now who would like to be reunited with their families. Of course, they want peace, but they want a country that they remember, because the one that they have left, the rights for women aren't necessarily like top notch.
Not the best, right?
In terms of even the Middle East, but especially the world. So they are watching rapt to see what the United States and Israel will do together. The United States, of course, supplying these munitions to Israel over the years as our greatest ally in the Middle East. But that's still signaling that we're not the ones pulling the trigger. We have supplied them. They are doing what they will. And that also lends itself to the unpredictability.
Jackie, you've talked a lot about the way that Iran used to be, 30 years ago, whatever it may be, but also right now in this moment too, escalation versus de-escalation. And do you take out all of their nuclear capabilities, or do you try to use this moment to bring them back to the table? And do you trust that they're willing to come back to the table, or is that deal that could have been done in that first 60 days, is that now off the table?
I agree with Kennedy. I think the president is doing everything he can possibly do to not ratchet this up at this time until he makes a final decision. Senator Kramer was on with Harris Faulkner before talking about finishing the job, going after Fordow, giving them the assets that they need to be able to do that, very much getting Americans involved in this. That would require congressional approval. He said there are many in Congress who would support the president if he wanted to do that. But it's a really difficult decision. Think about what the pros would be: finishing the job and potentially even regime change, to speak about the people on the ground and what they're looking for. But you don't know how that will end up and what the consequences could be. The cons of regime change could be that you get another authoritarian group potentially coming in there and taking control. So you wouldn't really have much of a change. You would just have a different group of tyrants in charge, or not popular with the American people. What we saw in Iraq, the Americans get involved with regime change and try to do something there. That becomes, a lifelong commitment if it is something that the U.S. was to do. Also, consider the fact that the president has a lot more intelligence than we do. And there are a lot of concerns about, we've seen the proxy groups of Iran all over the region, but whether they have sleeper cells elsewhere through the world, whether they're waiting and sitting on those assets to see whether or not to deploy them. So, the president might know more about that than we do. Benjamin Netanyahu over the weekend with Brett Baier also said that the 2 attempts on Donald Trump's life were from the Iranians. If he were to take out a supreme leader or go after Fordow, they could come after him again. So that's a consequence that he would have to think about. You know, with respect to what the Iranians want, it's 46 years post 1979. My mom hasn't been back to her country in 50 years and does have family and acquaintances there. The country she would go back to after what's happened even thus far would be very different than what she could possibly remember. But she also feels it's very important to try to awaken the Iranian people to do this themselves. Right. That's what the former crown prince, who was exiled, the son of the Shah, has been calling for some time, saying if the people rise up, the other countries around the globe will support you, but you need to do this. It's not about America coming in and doing it for you. Right. So these are very complicated, heavy decisions that the president has on his shoulders right now.
Dagan, the most complicated and heavy decision arguably is a 30,000-pound bunker buster that may or may not be the ultimate trump card. And I'm curious about how you're thinking about that.
So the bunker buster would be delivered. This is an ordnance. It's a MOP, a massive ordnance penetrator delivered by the B-2 bomber, which has a home at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. This is what has been discussed, I would say at this point ad nauseum, as the way to destroy the Fordo nuclear facility in Iran, because it's a half a mile in a mountain. However, as Brian and I talked to Gabriel Nerona, who was the Iran advisor for the State Department in the first Trump administration, he said, I think Israel would never have attacked Iran without a plan on how to take out Fordo. And it's a mountain to climb to think, to make that plan, assuming that the United States would get involved and assist with our B-2 stealth and with our bunker buster. Lucas Tomlinson was reporting earlier, Israel, there are people talking about that the bunker buster and the B-2, that is not the only way to get at the Fordo nuclear facility. That there is an elite Air Force commando unit that belongs to Israel called the 5101 Shell Dog. And they attacked a Syrian underground missile facility where Iran was sending, it was an Iranian missile manufacturing plant that was deep in Syrian territory. Mm-hmm. It was located in the Masyaf area and was producing precision-guided missiles for Hezbollah and the Assad regime. So there are the possible other ways to get at Fordo. However, because there's so much enriched uranium that is there, Gabriel Nerona said you have large stockpiles of 60% enriched uranium, the kind of thing a terror group like Al-Qaeda would dream of getting. So I think you will have to go in on the ground. Who's the we in all of this? And question. With the Nimitz moving out of the South China Sea to the Middle East, the Carl Vinson group is already there. I raised the question, what about Taiwan? Who's our biggest enemy here? It's China. And who is China's ally? It's Iran. Mm-hmm. Is Taiwan taken care of just by our submarines off of Guam?
Well, Brian, I certainly don't want you to weigh in on market perspective, but I will add into this conversation.
I'd rather do that than try to figure out what's going to happen with Taiwan, just to be honest with you. My foreign policy chops are not good enough to figure that out.
But people, many comments this morning, and I mentioned one of them yesterday, market response is always relatively short and shallow to these moments. We're still holding above a 6,000 on the S&P 500, all as I think people are trying to figure out, what does this mean for us at home? What does this mean for foreign policy and the likes?
Well, I think the one key phrase, and maybe this was a throwaway phrase, but I don't think so, when President Trump said he's demanding a complete give up by Iran. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we keep talking about, are we going to go back to the negotiating table or not? Mm-hmm. There is no negotiating table anymore. The table is gone, okay? There is no negotiating at this point. It is how quickly does Iran want to acknowledge that it is defeated. And I would say the sooner it acknowledges it's defeated, better are the chances that the Ayatollah doesn't end up out of power, if you're just thinking from his perspective. Because right now, forget about regime change coming from anything that the U.S. might be involved in. When people are fleeing Tehran because the president of the United States is saying, I'd get out of there if I were you, you're talking about, as Larry Kudlow said, the Iranian street. And I don't know what's going to happen with them. But from a market perspective, I think what happens is this has been so decisive, actually, that the market, I don't see prolonged war here. I see it's a question of how quickly does Iran just say we're beat. And maybe they won't do that. But if the Ayatollah won't do that, he doesn't have anybody left around him. The guys around him weren't there last week. Like the people running the show for him were not there last week. They've been replaced twice over. So how long and what is he, 85-year-old guy? How long does he stay in power? Markets look at this and they see a decisive Israeli victory. And I think it happens without all the feared U.S. involvement that some people are saying. And I think that's a very good outcome to Israel do this job and not the United States primarily.
We'll continue to watch this. This is the story of the day.